When people that haven't taken a psychology class, when they think about psychology, a lot of times they think about topics related to abnormal psychology. Stuff that you might see on TV like Criminal Minds or multiple personalities, things of that nature. Abnormal, by definition, is out of the ordinary. What social psychology is, on the other hand, is how, quote, normal people behave, how the average person will respond in a particular situation. This is important. So this field can give you insight into how you might respond in a particular situation, how your neighbors might respond. Towards the end of this slide, I'll give you a real-world example of this with the bystander effect. So, our world is a social/cultural creation. We need other people to survive, and you can look in your daily life and you can see some of these examples of this that are fairly apparent. Example, the food that you ate today, where did it come from? Chances are there's a lot of people that worked to get that food to your table. Social psychology is defined as the study of how people think about, influence, and relate to other people. Social psychology is about how the groups, culture, society influences the individual and how the individual can influence the group. Social psychology is also about how a person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by those around them. Because no one's doing this by themselves. You need other people, and they do end up influencing you, and you influence them. Social psychology is related to real life. So, for example, social psychology started getting bigger after the Civil War. People wanted to use the field of psychology to help heal the country. And at that time, they were looking at topics like racism and prejudice and attitudes. So it's very similar to the things that we study today in social psychology. After World War II, social psychology saw another bump when people tried to understand how that could all happen. You know, how could the Nazis take over most of Europe? The Holocaust, how could things that were so terrible, how could those things happen? And so they looked to social psychology to try to figure it out. So social psychology is connected to real life. It is also often experimental, an experimental investigation into why things occur with people. A lot of psychological research is correlational, and that's not necessarily bad, but if you're looking at causation, an experimental design is better. So social psychologists will manipulate an independent variable to try to draw conclusions about the effects on a dependent variable. As an example, the bystander effect. You may have already heard this story before. Kitty Genovese. She was brutally murdered in New York City in the 1960s. She was stabbed and beaten. It happened at about 3 a.m. in the morning, and it took about 30 minutes. At that time, the press stated that there were 38 neighbors that watched and heard this gory scene take place. It's a very tragic story. So some social psychologists, they thought to themselves, how could something like this happen? How can 38 people be present at a murder that lasts for 30 minutes and not really do anything about it? So a couple of social psychologists designed an experiment. They tried to use the experimental design to try to find out why this occurred. In their study, participants were to go sit in a room, and they were randomly assigned to either sit in that room by themselves, alone, or they were going to go into the room and sit there with other people. Then they had the room start to slowly fill up with smoke. So the IV is that you're by yourself or you're with other people. The DV, the dependent variable, is how you respond to this emergency. The room is filling up with smoke. The building may be on fire. It's definitely a potential problem that you need to have addressed. We would like to think that everyone in both groups responded to this potential emergency by getting up and doing something, but that's not what the research demonstrated. When they were alone, the research showed that participants did something about 75% of the time. So 25% didn't do anything while this room's filling up with smoke. That being said, when someone else was in the room with you or with the participants, that percent dropped to 50%. So it's a huge decrease. Only half did something as this room fills up with smoke. And this is called the bystander effect, the tendency to be less likely to help in an emergency when other people are present. Since that original study, numerous other studies have been conducted that add support to this bystander effect. And you can search it on PsycInfo if you're interested in more information. One of the other questions, follow-up questions to this is, why does this bystander effect occur? Researchers have settled on a couple of reasons. One, you look to see how other people are going to react in a situation. If no one else is reacting, in your mind you might think, Well, this is not an emergency. No one else is doing anything. This is how easily the group can influence individuals/you. Second is what's called diffusion of responsibility. Basically, when something bad is happening, the responsibility is diffused to all the other people around you, so you don't feel that bad because there's 37 other people that didn't do anything either. And so the responsibility is diffused among the entire group. These are the kinds of topics that we'll discuss in this chapter. We'll talk about social cognition, which goes into attribution and attitudes, social behaviors such as altruism and aggression, social influence, conformity, obedience. We'll also talk a little bit about intergroup relations, close relationships, and then a little bit on social psychology and health and wellness. On the next slide, we will start with social cognition.